Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Irene and I'm a registered dietitian, and today we're talking about intuitive eating. Intuitive eating is something that I live and breathe by, and it is pretty much the only eating pattern that I will stand 100% behind. That is because I don't believe in diets and I don't like telling people to eat a certain way or that they need to eat certain foods. I feel like that's just very ignorant of the individual, because I have learned in my practice as a dietitian that food choices are very personal and it affects you in more than like one way. So it's not just like you eating the food and getting the nutrients, it's also an emotional thing as well. So whether that is you feeling guilty because you're eating certain foods, or that you feel helpless because you can't afford to maybe buy the types of foods that you want to be eating, or whether that is, celebrating with food for big life accomplishments and things like that. Food and nutrition is highly individualized. It also depends on a lot of different factors, including things like your age, gender, ethnicity, environment, and health conditions. For example, I'm not going to recommend someone with stricture and Crohn's to eat a high fiber diet. That's going to cause a blockage for them. And even though fiber is very healthy for that specific individual, it's probably going to cause more harm than good. So rather than focusing on specific foods to eat, I like to focus on how eating different foods make you feel. Pretty much all of the wisdom from this video comes from this wonderful book by Evelyn Tribole and Elsie Rutch. Forgive me if I say their names wrong, but the book is called Intuitive Eating. I came across this book when I was in college, and I was actually suffering from a lot of disordered eating habits. I don't know if I've ever spoken about this before, but in college, much like a lot of girls around this age, I went through a couple years of battling restrictive and binge eating. I was never formally diagnosed with an eating disorder or anything like that, but looking back on it now, there was definitely something going on. Thankfully, I was able to kind of help myself and dig myself out of that hole, but I had a really terrible relationship with food and also my body image, and this book helped me tremendously. So I'm going to be going through kind of the main principles that this book goes through, but I highly encourage you to get the book if you want some more details and things like that. There are 10 main principles of intuitive eating, and the first principle is rejecting the diet mentality. So this is probably one of the hardest things to do, just because I feel like dieting and diet culture is everywhere. Whether that's you grew up with an aunt that was always on the latest fad diet, or maybe you grew up like me with family constantly commenting on your body and the way it looks, or whether that's just comparing yourself on social media to a super stick thin model. Rejecting the diet mentality is all about not feeling like you have to eat a certain way or look a certain way, and catching yourself whenever you are having these thought patterns and intentionally making choices that kind of go against the grain almost. This takes a lot of effort to do and a lot of conscious intention. So whether that is you became vegetarian, or if you follow intermittent fasting, because that is somehow going to get you to lose weight by eating less, by restricting how you're eating. So these kinds of things fall within diet culture. These are the things that we're going to consciously have to undo. The next principle is honoring your hunger. So this one sounds like a very obvious one, you should eat when you're hungry and stop when you're full. But a lot of times when we have been dieting for a while, we may kind of lose this sense of when are we hungry? This is all about relearning those hunger cues and knowing when you're hungry. A lot of signs that you might be hungry are your stomach is growling, or you feel very irritable or lightheaded, fatigued, you have no energy, these types of things. Really relearning your own hunger cues and eating when you are hungry is going to be very important. If you are someone that has been restricting for a while, this may be kind of hard to do. You may be used to putting off your hunger and making yourself busy instead of eating when you should be. This is all about learning when your body needs some extra energy and giving it to it. Third principle, and arguably the most important one, is making peace with food. This one is probably the most difficult as well. It's really all about giving yourself permission to eat whatever whatever it is that you feel like eating, and not setting any limits. So not saying that any food is off limits or bad, and just allowing yourself to eat what you want to eat. This may be very difficult for anyone that has struggled with restrictive eating in the past, whether that is you were on a restrictive diet or you were restricting calories or things like that. A lot of times what happens when you restrict food, especially for a while, you end up feeling very deprived. And then when you feel deprived, you end up craving it a lot. And when you crave something a lot, sometimes you just give in. Like, you don't have the willpower or whatever it is, and you give in, and then you feel bad about yourself, and then it becomes this like, okay, well, I screwed up, so I may as well go all in. And then you end up, I don't know, eating the whole package of Oreos or something. You feel just awful about yourself, not only because you ate the entire family size package of Oreos, but also you just physically feel awful from eating that much sugar. Initially, this may be very hard to do, to give yourself permission to just eat things that you have been restricting for a while, but I feel like this principle is about building trust within yourself and knowing that yes, I can have an Oreo and not feel like I need to eat the entire package. I think one of the things that I learned, especially about this principle, is that like, if I allow myself to eat anything and not feel restricted, I will naturally know when to stop, because I don't feel like this is the last time I'm ever going to eat this. I need to eat this whole package before tomorrow because tomorrow is a new day and I'm not going to do this anymore. I don't feel any of that kind of stuff anymore. One of the things that this book mentioned and walked me through, which I think was super helpful, was write out a list of these like off limits foods or like bad foods that you wouldn't typically allow yourself to eat, and just slowly try and work on giving yourself permission to eat it. So it may not be that you can actually like keep this food in the house, but maybe go out to a restaurant or the store and buy like a single portion of it, you know? So if Oreos is your thing, maybe you don't get the whole family size bag of Oreos, you just get like the little 6-pack, or I'm sure they even sell like 2. Really being mindful when you're eating that. How is this making me feel? Am I enjoying it? Things like that. This is a really good way to give yourself like some guardrails. You're trusting yourself with eating this food, but you're also not enabling a binge later on. Over time, with practice, you're able to understand a little bit more about, okay, yes, I can keep this in my house now and not feel like I have to eat it all within like the first day. I feel like this is a really good way to like reincorporate some of those forbidden foods back into your life. So the next principle is to challenge the food police. And the food police is that voice in the back of your head that is judging you for your food choices, saying like, don't eat anything after 6 p.m. or bread will make you gain weight, or you shouldn't eat anything with fat in it. Those types of things. The food police have these like kind of rules around like eating, the types of foods that you can eat or that are good or bad and things like that. And the things that it tells you kind of make you feel bad about yourself. And sometimes the food police is rooted in some truth. Like for example, sugar is bad for you in large quantities. It may shame you anytime you're reaching for like a dessert, or if you have anything with added sugar in it, which is a lot of things nowadays. Sometimes it may feel like it's like doing you a favor and trying to like keep you healthy, but it really contributes to this bad mentality of like restricting certain foods. And I do want to say that orthorexia is also an eating disorder, and so that is when you're like so hyper focused and obsessed with eating healthy. That's also not good for you either. So this principle is all about kind of battling those voices in our head that may be fueled by diet culture and maybe making you feel bad about some of your food choices. So the fifth principle is all about discovering your satisfaction factor, and this is about making food and eating food enjoyable. I feel like eating is one of my greatest joys in life. I love eating food and I love trying new foods. With people that have had restrictive eating patterns in the past, this is something that may not be enjoyable anymore for you. So this is all about rediscovering that. And so some things that are very helpful in kind of discovering the satisfaction factor are making sure that the environment that you're eating in isn't stressful, trying to slow down and really savor the food and enjoy it, observe it with all your 5 senses. It helps if you're not in like a time crunch or anything like that. Really paying attention to your food and how it's making you feel. I feel like for me, there is like a bell curve to my satisfaction. With the first bite, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so good. My satisfaction is going, I want to eat more of it. And then so I eat some more and it's tasting really good. And then at some point it reaches this like kind of the top point of the bell curve where I'm like, this is amazing. I feel full though. And if I have another bite, the satisfaction kind of is not as high as the previous bite was. I may be starting to feel like overly full or sick and things like that because maybe I ate too much like heavy cream and that just like doesn't sit well in my stomach or something like that. And so I'm not as satisfied as I was before. This is all about discovering where that like top spot is for you, or that like sweet spot almost. Principle number 6 is feeling your fullness, and this can kind of go a little bit along with principle number 5 as well. Principle number 5, it can encompass principle number 6 a little bit, I feel like, because sometimes being satisfied, for me at least, is not just about I ate something that I really liked today, but it's also about like my belly is full and I feel nourished and full of energy. Principle number 6 is more just focused about your satiety and knowing when you are full. Even though you might want to have another bite of that ice cream because it's so good, you know that you're full now, and if you have another bite, you won't feel as well. Sometimes I feel like people depend on a lot of outside factors to tell them when they're full. So like whether that's like you have finished and cleaned off your plate, or your lunch break is up, or maybe you're eating with other people and so they've been eating for an hour, so you're also eating for an hour, but you've kind of eaten beyond your fullness levels and you're just eating because other people were eating. So this is really being aware of like when your body is feeling full and knowing when to stop. So feeling your fullness is also a little bit about understanding like what foods fill you up and what foods kind of are less filling. So for example, I find that things that are like higher in protein, like eggs especially, really fill me up, whereas things like salads or like crackers and things like that don't really fill me up as much. And that's just something that I've learned. Like I know if I eat a salad for lunch, I'm gonna be hungry an hour later. Maybe that just means I have to pair my salad with something higher in protein, or I need to schedule my meals a little bit differently. Principle 7 is coping with your emotions with kindness. This one is all about not turning to food anytime you're feeling like any type of emotion. I feel like with the culture that we're in, this is kind of hard to do because like, for example, if something amazing happened, you celebrate with a party, and at that party you're probably gonna have food and like cupcakes or like some kind of dessert or things like that. So you oftentimes will associate like desserts and sweet treats with something happy. On the flip side, if every time your parents were gonna give you bad news, they made lasagna or something like that, you would start to associate lasagna with bad news and like feeling bad, and then maybe you wouldn't like it as much. This is about kind of taking emotions out of like food, which is very hard. Catching yourself when you're sad or anxious or depressed or things like that, like not turning to certain foods or not turning to just eating in general to cope with those feelings. Instead, maybe turning to something else, whether that's like reading a book or maybe going to see a friend and things like that. It's more about coping with your feelings in a different type of way. Principle 8 is to respect your body, and this one is really about understanding that no matter what size your body is, it deserves to be fed and to be treated well and to be nurtured. And this can be really tough to do just because of like society and some of the like cultural views and biases. But I feel like kind of with the body positivity movement, this has hopefully gotten a little bit better. Unfortunately, I obviously like wouldn't know because I have thin privilege. My body is just naturally on the thinner side, like is partially genetic. It's not just about how someone eats. It's about understanding that your genes are going to affect how you look to a certain degree, and the genes that I'm talking about is the genetic one, not the blue genes. Things that can kind of help with kind of accepting your body image is getting rid of like scales and things like that. So instead of focusing on how much you weigh, focusing on how you look and feel in your clothes, because also another thing, muscle weighs more than fat, and so you could be hitting the gym really hard and gaining weight, but if you are losing inches like around your waist, you may be feeling great, and so the scale is really not always a great indicator. The next principle is about movement and kind of feeling the difference when you're approaching movement. So with this principle, we want to focus on a lot more different things. So instead of focusing on, did I burn X amount of calories today, or did I sweat this much, did I lose this much weight today, with exercise we want to focus instead on, am I able to handle my stress better, did I sleep better, did I feel more energized, do I feel stronger, and these types of things instead of things that are like related to our weight or our image. Because exercise is very healthy, it's recommended that you do a combination of cardio and strength training. So the last principle is honor your health with gentle nutrition. This one is all about incorporating foods that are good for your health as well as your fun foods that you want to eat together, knowing that you don't have to eat perfectly to be healthy. And hopefully along the way you will have discovered that eating some of these foods that are actually considered good for your health also makes you feel good. I feel like for me, I believe in the 80-20 rule. So 80% of the time I eat generally pretty healthy, and 20% of the time I eat those like not as healthy foods. And I feel like this is a really good balance of allowing myself some freedom in eating these foods that I find a lot of pleasure in that may not really have as much nutrition value, but also making sure that I'm fueling my body correctly with all the micronutrients and the macronutrients that I need in order to be my best self. So if you are new to intuitive eating, it's really important to give yourself grace. This is something that definitely takes a while to unlearn some of those things that may be ingrained in you. In fact, the authors talk about 5 different stages of intuitive eating. The first one being like hitting rock bottom, where you feel absolutely horrible about foods that you eat and you feel so guilty. And then there is stage 2, where you're relearning a lot of things. You have to be very conscious and aware about the intuitive eating principles. From experience, I feel like this stage can kind of take a really long time, and it's really hard too. You may feel like you're taking 1 step forward and 2 steps back at some times. And then in stage 3, that's when you're really rediscovering your intuitive eating self, and you're getting better at honoring your hunger, but you may still have some trouble with making peace with food and, you know, letting yourself eat those like forbidden foods. Stage 4 is where things start to get a little bit easier, and you've made peace with a lot of the foods that you typically wouldn't have allowed yourself to eat in the past, and you're learning how different foods make you feel, and you're better able to make decisions. And then lastly, at stage 5, you feel very at ease with intuitive eating, and you trust yourself, and you know when to honor your hunger and fullness cues, and you may choose to eat healthy foods and exercise because it makes you feel good. You don't really feel that pressure to eat or look a certain way. So that pretty much wraps up the video. If you want to learn more, I highly encourage you to pick up the book Intuitive Eating by Evelyn Tribole and Elsie Retch. They're actually both dietitians with tons of great knowledge on this topic. But if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give it a like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.